Hello, LinkedIn. And depending on where you're tuning in from, it is maybe good afternoon. It's good afternoon where I am. So that's what I'm going to share. It's been a long time since I've actually gone live on video here on LinkedIn. I used to do it all the time. I recently switched over to doing audio lives, and they have kind of pros and cons for each different type. The audio lives are live only. So if you don't join us in the room at the time, then I'm afraid to say that you've actually missed out. Now, because of that, I've decided to switch back and see how video is going, because at least with my lovely guest today, Marisa, we can, if you're not watching it live, you can catch us on the replay. And one of the absolute pros of the LinkedIn audio is that you can see who's in the room, and people can come up and they can share on stage and they can kind of voice their own question themselves. So if you're watching today, whether it is on live or whether it's on replay, we won't see who you are unless you write a comment for us to let us know that you're here. And I would very much encourage you to come along and say hello or pose a question. Now, the reason that Marisa and I are having this conversation today is to talk about the most recent episode of the Happier at Work podcast, which came out last Friday. And we talked about this concept of emotional salary. And this is Marisa's absolute baby, let's say. And yeah. I won't do it justice, I think, if I do an introduction. So I'll let Marisa introduce herself and this concept. But it's all really relating back to why do we actually work, and the fact that we don't just work for money. So Marisa, do you want to introduce yourself, tell people a little bit about what you're about, and then we'll highlight some of the key points from the podcast episode. For anyone who hasn't listened to the full episode yet, there is a link below in the description. So if you're interested in what we're talking about today, do go and check that out.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Aoife, for this opportunity. And yes, my name is Marisa Elzundia. I am right now in Spain, in Madrid, and I am the creator of the Emotional Salary Barometer. It's a concept that was born around 5 years ago, and it just surrounded the question, why do we work? Why do we work? If we take the economic aspect of the work equation, what are we left with? And emotional salary is it distills from the answers to that questions. And I think it's a question relevant for all of us right now working, because as I say in the podcast, work is the time frame that occupies us the most as adults. And I'm not saying that that money is not relevant. Of course it's relevant. Like we all work for money, yes. But apart from that, we owe ourselves this question. We owe ourselves to want more from work apart from money. I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. A quick shout out to Alexandru Philip, who is tuned in live. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I think, Marisa, back to your point on this idea of, and I've seen research that shows this, that you earn up to a certain amount. I think the amount was in US dollars, and it was something like 70,000 US dollars. So anything above 70,000 US dollars in a year, it becomes kind of a diminishing return. So, you kind of, I suppose, a happiness point, you want to earn more and more money. And I think as a society, we focus very much on climbing the corporate ladder, on earning more and more, and, acquiring all of this money, acquiring all of this wealth, but to what end? And I think coming back to your point about, well, why do we work? And it's not just about the money. And if it becomes just about the money, then you nearly build up the sense of resentment, because you're doing it just for the money and you're not getting any sort of pleasure or any sort of return for that. Now, since the recording of this podcast episode, so we recorded the podcast episode a few months ago, and Marisa invited me to take the emotional salary. And for me, it was an eye-opener to see, because it's not just, so there's 10 different factors, isn't that right? So 10 different factors, and it's a set point in time. So it's about looking at where you are right now and then being able to take specific actions to address those different issues. Do you want to kind of talk a little bit more about how the tool itself works? Because I don't think we didn't dive into that in a huge amount of detail on the podcast episode, but people can go and they can take the test for free. They can understand more about how, I suppose, what lights them up and some specific actions that they can take to be happier at work using this tool.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I want to make clear is that the tool, the barometer, is not a tool that I created just because. You know, like that I woke up one day and say, oh, you know, like these are the 10 factors. And, no, I mean, it's a tool based on enormous research, you know, enormous research that we delve very, very deep into the question, why do people work? What do people are getting from their work beyond the economic aspect of it? And that's where the 10 factors came out, which, as you already know, is autonomy, belonging, creativity, direction, enjoyment, mastery, inspiration, personal growth, professional growth, and purpose. These 10 factors are not exclusive in our work. It's not that in one moment I have purpose, and in the other moment I have creativity, and the other moment I have autonomy. They overlap each other. It's just that they manifest in different ways. Yeah. For example, this conversation that we have, I can tap into, for example, the inspiration factor. I can tap in the professional growth factor. Yeah. I also can tap, maybe because I like you a lot, it can also tap into the belonging factor, for example. Yeah. And those three aspects, just in the tip of my mind, are manifesting themselves in this moment. Yeah. And I'm having them thanks to my work. Yeah. I would have never met you if it were not because of my work. Yeah. And this recognition of what we have, that our work brings us, I think it kind of like changes our perspective of work. It kind of enlarges also those moments that we have from work that we really make a difference for us. And that's why the barometer, first of all, measures at this point in time, those 10 factors, are they present or not? Then it checks upon what is difference, because maybe for you autonomy is not important, but for me it's really important. So it also measures the relative importance of those 10 factors, and it also measures the action on opportunities, because I might not have, for example, a specific factor, let's say inspiration, but am I taking all the opportunities that my work gives me to develop that factor or not? And I think that's also like kind of like it's also a topic that is very relevant, because we as normal working people, we have many opportunities to grow our emotional salary, but the question is, are we taking all those opportunities? Because apart from the economic aspect, is one strong difference is that it's finite. Any company does not have like infinite resources where they can pay us infinite infinite amount of money. Wouldn't that be great? The inflation would be a bit high, but still, like they cannot pay us, they cannot increase our salaries every 6 months or every time we feel that we need to get more money. No, and that's a fact that we have to accept. And the beauty of emotional salary is that it's infinite. It's really infinite. Even if your emotional salary is high, you can even make it better. You can even use it to increase the emotional salary of others, and thus increasing yours. So if I have a strong sense of belonging, how can I have more of it? If I have a strong sense of creativity, how can I have more of it? And I think that's a real beauty of it. So yes.
Well, like, I suppose from my perspective, there's a few things that I'd love to highlight about it. And I think it's this case that when you find, and I've started talking an awful lot about toxic work environments recently,
Yes.
and when you find yourself in that environment where you're really not enjoying work, there's an opportunity to recognize the aspects of work that you do enjoy using the barometer. And I think it gives us that sense of acknowledgement of there are actually some parts that I enjoy that I'm not recognizing, because when we're in that difficult situation, it sort of colors everything about work. And I know from firsthand experience, because I have been in those situations, but having something to enable you to recognize all of the positive things that are happening at work. So that's the kind of the first thing that I wanted to share, is that you can acknowledge these positive things that are happening. The second point is that I love this so much because it ties in so closely with the research that I did as part of my master's, and that aspect of need satisfaction and the needs that we have as human beings, the needs that we have that particularly show up at work, are very closely related to the results of all of the research that you've done as well, Marisa. So I love that they kind of so closely tie together. But yeah, like I suppose it's just a really great opportunity for people to understand more about, like, you can't say, I think, in this day and age, that you work just for money. Money, yes, it plays a part. And I read a really interesting thing actually yesterday from one of my past podcast guests, and Andrew Bartlow, and he was talking about, he was doing a commencement speech for people who had just finished a graduate degree in the US. And I think when we first start out at work, we're looking for the best opportunity for us, and the best opportunity is the highest money, typically. And we try and build on that when we're looking for opportunities throughout our career. But I suppose the focus for me, and he said in his commencement speech, is looking for the greatest opportunities to grow and develop depending on what stage of your career you're at. So, like, early stage career is not necessarily the time that you want to be looking out for the greatest amount of money. It's the greatest amount of challenge and opportunity that you might have at work in order to grow and develop. And once you gain that experience, then you can start commanding more money, essentially. But it's looking for those amazing opportunities, I think. We're coming up on time here, Marisa. I can't believe, like, it tends to just go. I know, it goes so quickly. But is there anything else that you would like to share in relation to emotional salary? And I suppose for me, I would love to direct people to the full episode of the podcast. This is a LinkedIn live video to chat about some of the key points that we discussed on the podcast. The link to the full episode is in the comments below. And for anyone who's watching on replay, I would love to hear your questions as you go through. But is there anything else that you would like to share, or how can people find out more?
Yeah. There are two things, I think. The one is that emotional side recognizes what you have, but it also highlights what you want more of.
Yes.
So it's not only about, because it's not only about everything, I don't want to say that work has only needs to be positive. No, of course, you've been in a toxic environment. I've been in a toxic, and there are many things at work that are not working well. But you need to give a language. We need to give a language of what is exactly that's not working, because then it's better for us to find actions and opportunities to resolve those problems, because there is a lack of communication sometimes. So that it's about the recognition of what we have, but it's also the recognition and giving language of what we don't have. And yes,
I love that it's. Sorry, I was just going to say, I love that, because it's like, what I always say is, when I talk about need satisfaction at work, because it sounds quite out there. And if you had asked me 5 years ago, what are your needs? What are your needs at work? I'd be like, I have no idea what my needs are at work. But you certainly know when your needs are not being satisfied. You certainly know the areas that you feel frustrated at work. But having an ability to voice that and to give a language to it, to be able to have conversations where people are on the same page, I think that's a huge benefit.
It's like language to your emotion. And yes, like, of course, the podcasts, they have to listen to it, because I was actually, oh, should I listen to myself? And when I listened to it, actually I don't sound that bad. So yes, I can, as a person, yes,
you can confidently say,
I can confidently say that it's worth listening to it.
Yeah. I think,
and people can always find me in LinkedIn and in the webpage, emotional-salary.com.
Yeah. So you are tagged in this post, the post that about this live. So feel free to connect with Marisa that way. I am so used to this stage, I think, hearing my own voice from the podcast that it doesn't even, the thought doesn't even occur to me anymore that I'm like, you know, I think when you first start doing it, maybe you think, oh, that's not my voice, or my voice doesn't sound like that, or, you know, the typical thing. But thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom on the podcast, and also for coming back to share your thoughts and your wisdom today. I really, really appreciate that. And I hope for anyone who's tuned in that you took a lot from today's live broadcast. And if you're thirsty for more, like Marisa said, go along and listen to the full podcast episode, and the link should be below in the comments where you can access the full podcast there. So thank you so much for tuning in live today, and thank you, Marisa.
Thank you, Aoife, and thanks everyone.